Places have a soul, and men make it for them by living in them. Even after the men pass away and the place with the soul has become depopulated and deserted, something, if it be only a memory, remains. And with a dear and learned old friend we know, an old man, a memory remains of an earlier and, to his thinking, a gladder day in the Belfast that he once knew, and about which he has stored up much out of the way knowledge. We had placed ourselves under his guidance to be taken by him on a tour of a part of Belfast as, from his experience and his reading, he knew it once existed. Seeing with his eyes where we passed through the city centre, on the flags in Donegall Place, great crowds were gathered around the entrance to the Royal Hotel, kept by one Charles Kearns at number 27. The coach from Dublin had just arrived, bringing with it, amongst his passengers, a great English writer, William Makepeace Thackeray. The great man would be dined and wined by the citizens and taken to the theatre, and later would write down his impressions of the town and publish them in a book that would be read with much interest in the after years by unborn generations of Belfast men and women. From Donegall Place into Castle Street, following our guide, we went, and passed at the corner the noble mansion of Thomas Ludford Stewart, the sovereign of Belfast, where it stood amid the splendid gardens all abloom with apple and pear trees that stretched away in shady groves and green alleys to where in a great green space the city fountain stood, on the spot through which in later years a street would run that would come to be called after it, Fountain Street. And housewives came there and gossiped by the fountain in the shade of the trees, while they filled their pails with the clear spring water, and merry children played about and drank noisily from the chained iron cups that hung from its brimming basins. The narrow footways of Castle Street where we walked were thronged with people, for in this fine spring evening the elite of the city had come to do its shopping, and in their little low two-storied shops, the Mrs. Anne Faulkner and Anne Coates, milliners, and Miss Johnston, dressmaker and mantua maker, were all agog behind their little diamond-paned windows, displaying to advantage before their delighted customers the latest creations from London. Mob caps, pot hats and Quaker bonnets, pork pie hats and pancake bonnets, mushroom hats with flowing ostrich plumes, as were then in vogue, as also were the gypsy and the Dolly Varden styles, for Dickens had just written his great story, Barnaby Rudge. And in the window of that enterprising person, Mrs. Rutherford, staymaker at number 45, was a notice to the effect that she had, for a season, secured the services of that incomparable artist, William Heron, staymaker, just arrived from London, who, having served the most eminent masters in that branch of business both in London and Dublin, begs leave to acquaint the ladies that he makes stays, children's coats and slips, etc., after the newest taste. Those ladies who are pleased to employ him may assuredly depend on having their work done in the most complete and fashionable manner. His lodgings are at John Jackson's, tide waiter on the New Quay, Belfast. He also makes hoop petticoats in the most genteel manner. The pianoforte warehouse of Charles Dalton, as we passed by it, was made melodious with the musical efforts of several young ladies who were engaged in trying over the latest new pieces from London and the continent, and Mr. Dalton at number 28 shared the patronage of the nobility and gentry with Mr. Robert Hart at number 18, who had with him in the pianoforte business a Mr. William R. Hart, a musician who, it was to be presumed, could be hired for routs and balls as occasion demanded. There was much well-trodden straw about the doorstep of the busy inn kept by Sam McCann at number 19 next door, where a group of horsey-looking loungers stood to view the lively scene as the gigs and phaetons and buggies of the shoppers rattled past over the cobblestones through the narrow way. Braziers and seal engravers were busy under their flaming gas jets in their little dark dens, and cheek by jowl and by contrast, the bright and prosperous-looking apothecaries and jewellers' shops made a brave and colourful show. In Mill Street, at Chapel Lane where we passed, the air was made malodorous with the fumes from Sam Johnston's glue works and the brewery of James McGill, and then Irish Street was made noisy with the screaming of the hucksters and fruit vendors whose handcarts lined the footway on either side, the cries of honeyball apples, sweet juicy oranges, Ballandary onions a penny a pound, rose high above the raucous voices of the ballad singers, who in turn told of that never-to-be sufficiently besung exploit of the great dog, Master McGrath, and the equally famous of those two great heroes, Bold Donnelly and Cooper, who fought upon Kildare. The pungent odour of Sam Johnson's tannery at number 37 Mill Street, beside St Clair's Court, and Sam Patterson's chandlery at number 59, made it a cause for wonder how Waddle Cunningham, gentleman, could be content to reside, as reside he did in his neat little private house, within smelling distance of the operations of the aforesaid manufacturers. But private and retired gentlemen, who had perhaps made their money in some equally odoriferous trade, were not too squeamish in the old days. Pungent smells were wholesome, they would tell you. Up a narrow entry on the left-hand side of Mill Street, near King Street, Crawford's starch works were growing busily, and beautiful gardens, bright with climbing bean flowers and well stocked with gooseberry and currant bushes, stretched away behind the houses to College Street and to Queen Street, southward. Cutlers, dyers, grocers, publicans, bakers, cabinet makers, tailors, butchers, builders, bookbinders were all represented within the confines of the narrow thoroughfare, and where we passed between the busy shops and the cosy dwelling houses, an air of brisk prosperity and comfort and contentment seemed to lie over all the old world place and make it glad.